I know this is unusual, and don't worry, it's not 10 o'clock, it's not the first Sunday sermon, this is the first. It is a second Sunday sermon because there is another massive, massive issue where we, the taxpayer, the consumer, are suffering because of the deliberate actions of institutions and people at the heart of central London. In this case, in the City of London. And in my view, it's completely unacceptable. I've talked about it for quite a long time, actually, but I really have to do a whole sermon on it because the numbers are so significant and it's such an outrage, and it's all part of the betrayal of Brexit. Because I touched in my first sermon about the fact that we haven't taken back control of our borders, and I'm going to now show you how, although in theory we're supposed to have taken back control of our laws and our money, it turns out that a bunch of technocrats out the side door, they're pulling all the strings, and it's you and I that are paying the bill, and someone else, rich city investors and institutions, they're the ones who are benefiting. So you may be aware, but in a sense, we the taxpayer, ultimately, we own the government. We elect it, and there's no such thing as government money. It's all our money. It's taxpayers' money. You might wonder, well, who owns the Bank of England? Who owns the Bank of England? Well, the answer is, again, it's owned by the government, and therefore it's actually owned by us, the taxpayer. So these two things, they sit alongside each other. So imagine, for example, that you've got this situation where we know that the Bank of England, they printed lots of money and they essentially gave it to the government after the financial crisis to pay for lots of things there. And then in COVID, the Bank of England printed another £400 million plus of what they call quantitative easing, essentially, again, to give it to the government to pay the bills because they couldn't raise it externally. So what I want you to imagine is, imagine a family living in a household, husband, wife, and quite a few children. And think of it like this. Think of it that the husband is the government. The wife is the Bank of England. And we, the taxpayers, we're all the children, okay? And there's quite a few children in this household. And on the mantelpiece, in the living room, there's two pots with the family's savings in it. You've got, in a sense, the husband's pot, and then you've got the wife's pot, and they've both got a bit of cash in, and that's all well and good. And in a sense, it's a happy family, and therefore, as a household, as a family, you consider both pots. You think that's our overall wealth together as a happy family. Now, unfortunately, the husband falls ill, which of course relates to the COVID crisis, and therefore can't earn any money. But there's still loads of money in the wife's pot. That's the Bank of England's pot. So, quite understandably, you know, it's a happy family. The wife says, well, look, I can lend you some money from my pot. And at the end of the day, we're all in this together. So the wife moves some money from her pot, her savings pot, on the mantelpiece into the husband's pot, because that, of course, it's the husband pot that pays all the bills, that buys the food and buys the clothes for the children, let's say, for the taxpayer, if you see what I mean. You get where I'm going with this. Now, being organised and diligent, the wife says, well, look, we better keep a track of how much money has gone from my savings pot, the wife's savings pot, into the husband's pot. So we'll create a sort of IOU note, okay? And we don't really need to charge a rate of interest, I mean, because we're all in this together, aren't we? It's all one big family household. But look, we'll create these IOU notes. There we are. Now, that all seems to work. But then something strange happens, because the wife then says, and this is the Bank of England, let's remember, is the wife's saving pot, says, well, actually, no, now I'm going to start charging you some rate of interest on what I've put into the husband's pot. And actually, this IOU note that you've got from the husband back to the wife's pot, I'm really quite focused on this, and I'm going to start to want some of this money back. And the husband says, well, hang on, I need a bit of time here. I'm only just getting back going again, just getting back into work. And look, we're a big family household. We've got decades ahead of us as a happy family. So why is all the rush? Why do you need the interest? Why, if I pay interest from the husband's pot, the government's pot, into the Bank of England's pot, the wife's pot, then that's going to mean less money to buy food for the children, to buy clothes for the children. In other words, to look after the taxpayer. So, in a sense, crikey, we might even have to send the children out to work or something. So, you see where I'm going with this, that it seems a bit odd that all of a sudden the Bank of England is rushing to get its money back. Then something even worse happens. So, the wife's got these IOU notes from her husband, from the government. She then starts to say, well, I tell you what, with this rate of interest on my IOU note, I'm going to sell that IOU note to some external moneylenders. Yes? You know, some of those sort of vulture folk, people who lend money at extortionate rates of interest. And I'm being a bit harsh here, but you see where I'm going with this. So the wife then says, well, I'll sell some of these IOU notes that I could just leave in my pot for decades as a happy family, because actually I, the wife, don't need the money. We're all in this together, aren't we? No, I'm going to sell it externally to some moneylenders. And they're going to say, well, not so sure about the risk of this, so I'm not going to offer you as much money for that IOU note. I want more interest, even more interest on that IOU note. You see where this is going? So all of a sudden, the external moneylender has got the IOU note, has paid a discount for it and is asking for even more interest and is asking the husband's pot to pay the cash. So all of a sudden, the money is leaving the family household. It's going externally. Now, this money was lent from the wife's pot, the Bank of England's pot, to the government's pot, the husband's pot, in an emergency. And they're all in this together. They don't need it back for decades and decades. And yet now, they've started to sell it externally. So the rate of interest is going up. The children have got less food, less clothes. The family household is struggling with the bills. And you're thinking, what's going on here? Why have we done this? Let me put this into context. The quantity of Bank of England quantitative easing is around 850 billion quid. These numbers are off the scale, impossible to imagine. It's about a third, 35% of our overall national debt. These are big, big numbers. So if the Bank of England starts selling some of that internal debt, you sort of hopefully understood the analogy, and it's selling that out into external markets, and it's done this again this week, it's just lobbed out 750 million quid's worth, then what's happening is the external market start to think, well, we can put the interest rates up. So that then affects everybody. And this is what's going on, totally unnecessarily. The Bank of England is indicating that it wants to charge a higher rate of interest to the government for this internal debt. That it's now totally wrongly, totally unnecessarily selling out into the external market, to the moneylenders. And they're pretty rapacious. They want their cash, they want their interest rates, so everything's going up. And to put this in context, the extra interest that I believe is unnecessarily being charged and that now appears in the Treasury's books every year, it's at least £10 billion a year. It could be as much extra, unnecessarily extra, as £20 billion plus. This is why the black hole suddenly appeared in the Treasury's accounts. And what the Bank of England completely wrongly is doing is saying, I'm going to sell some more of this QE debt, this quantitative easing debt, into the market. I know the language is weird, but it's now called quantitative tightening. The Bank of England is appearing a desperate seller. And if you're a desperate seller, then what happens, of course, is everyone knows that they'll offer a lower price. They want a higher rate of interest. So once again, folks, I bring it back to this issue of taking back control. We thought we're taking back control of our money, but it now turns out that unelected people at the Bank of England, led by, I believe, someone who's totally unsuited for the job, Andrew Bailey, I believe that in a sense, his response, his requirements for this higher rate of interest on this Bank of England quantitative easing means that the rate of interest is going up. all of us, therefore, are now suffering the consequences. Higher tax rises, totally unnecessary. Higher mortgage bills, totally unnecessary. Because of the consequences of unelected technocrats in the city and their friends, the external moneylenders, the institutions, the hedge funds, the smart people in the city. Once again, they're making a load of cash. Who's paying the bill, folks? It's you and I. So in a sense, the government, on behalf of us, the taxpayer, in theory took back control of our money, but they've now ceded control of our money to the unelected technocrats in the city. And I think it's disgraceful. I think it's outrageous. And once again, I hope I've proven that we, the taxpayer, are being ripped off. Here endeth my second Sunday sermon.